Ma'am, people like you don't walk into this bank carrying checks worth nearly $500,000. The sound of paper tearing sliced through the quiet lobby like a knife. Several customers looked up instantly. A man in a gray suit stopped typing on his phone. Somewhere near the glass entrance, the soft jazz music still played overhead, calm and polished, completely disconnected from the humiliation unfolding beneath the white marble lights. Emily Carter held the torn cashier's check between perfectly manicured fingers, her expression twisted into the kind of smile that only came from certainty. Certainty that she was right. Certainty that the woman standing across from her did not belong there. Gloria Bennett didn't move at first. Her dark brown eyes stayed fixed on the two halves of the check fluttering slowly onto the polished floor. One piece landed near her worn sneakers. The other slid beneath the velvet rope dividing the private banking line from the public waiting area. A few people quietly stepped back, not because Gloria had done anything threatening, but because embarrassment was contagious and nobody wanted to stand too close to it. Gloria swallowed carefully. Her faded blue caregiver scrubs looked freshly washed but old enough to have lost their color years ago. The sleeves were slightly frayed near the wrists. A canvas handbag rested against her hip, the strap stitched twice where it had torn before. She had come straight from an overnight shift at St. Mary's Assisted Living Center, where she spent 12 hours helping elderly patients eat, walk, and sleep through pain that never fully went away. Her feet ached. Her shoulders burned. But none of that showed on her face now. What showed was something quieter, something heavier. Dignity trying very hard not to crack. "I only asked to deposit it," Gloria said softly. Emily gave a short laugh loud enough for nearby customers to hear. "And I'm supposed to believe this belongs to you?" Her acrylic nails tapped against the counter. "Do you know how many scams we see every week?" A younger teller beside her shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Across the lobby, the branch manager glanced over from his office window, saw Gloria standing there in old scrubs, then looked away almost immediately. Gloria bent slowly at the knees and reached for one torn piece of the check. Her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion. The overhead chandelier reflected against the marble floor beside her fingers. "You could have verified it first," she whispered. Emily folded her arms. "Ma'am, that routing number belongs to Executive Private Banking." She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice just enough to sound cruel instead of loud. "People don't just walk in off the street pretending to move nearly $500,000. The words hit harder because Gloria had spent most of her life hearing versions of them. "People like you. People like you don't belong here. People like you should stay in the background." A little boy sitting beside his father near the entrance stared openly at Gloria now. His father gently pulled him closer, like caution was appropriate. Gloria noticed that more than anything else. Not the torn check. Not the staring adults. The child. The way children learn judgment from rooms like this. Slowly, she picked up the second half of the check and tried aligning the torn edges together. Her fingers paused when she noticed a small ink smudge near the signature line. Daniel Bennett. Her son's name. For a brief second, the noise inside the bank disappeared entirely. She remembered Daniel at 12 years old sitting at a tiny kitchen table at 2 a.m., studying algebra under a flickering stove light while she ironed uniforms before another double shift. She remembered skipping meals so he could afford SAT prep books. She remembered him promising her one thing after Harvard graduation beneath cold spring rain outside Cambridge. "One day, Mom," he had whispered while holding her hands tightly. "Nobody will ever make you feel small again." Gloria blinked hard and carefully folded the torn pieces together against her chest. Then, from somewhere deeper inside the building, the executive elevator gave a soft metallic ding. The soft metallic sound of the executive elevator seemed to change the air inside the lobby instantly. Several employees straightened, without realizing they were doing it. The branch manager adjusted his tie so quickly he nearly dropped the tablet in his hand. Emily glanced toward the back hallway with sudden alertness, then quickly smoothed the front of her cream-colored blazer. Gloria remained kneeling near the counter, carefully holding the torn pieces of the cashier's check together as if the paper itself still mattered. The elevator doors slid open slowly, revealing polished black shoes first, then the sharp navy suit above them. Daniel Bennett stepped forward beside two board members and a regional director carrying folders against his chest. He was taller than most people expected from television interviews, broad-shouldered, calm, the kind of man who walked into rooms without needing attention because attention found him anyway. His silver watch caught the overhead light as he loosened one cuff slightly while listening to something the regional director was saying about quarterly expansion numbers. Then he looked up and stopped walking completely. The entire conversation around him died mid-sentence. Daniel's eyes locked onto the woman near the teller counter, onto the faded blue scrubs, onto the trembling hands holding torn paper, onto the familiar canvas handbag he had bought her 8 Christmases ago because she refused to spend money replacing the old one. His face changed instantly. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for everyone nearby to feel something shift beneath the polished professionalism of the room. Mom. The word landed softly, but the effect was immediate. Emily blinked once, confused. The branch manager's face lost all color. Gloria looked up slowly from the floor, her expression calm despite the exhaustion resting beneath her eyes. "Hi, baby," she said quietly. Daniel moved toward her without another word. His polished shoes crossed the marble floor in long, steady steps until he stood directly beside her. For a moment, he only stared at the torn check in her hands. His jaw tightened slightly. Not anger exactly. Something colder. More controlled. The regional director beside him looked between Gloria and Emily with growing panic. "What happened here?" Daniel asked. His voice never rose, which somehow made the silence afterward even worse. Nobody answered immediately. Emily opened her mouth once, then closed it again. Gloria began standing slowly, but Daniel reached out instinctively, helping her before she could lose balance. His hand stayed lightly at her elbow. Careful, respectful, the way sons touched mothers who had spent their entire lives carrying too much weight alone. "I was just trying to explain procedure," Emily finally said, forcing a nervous smile. Daniel looked at the torn pieces again. "Procedure involves destroying customer property?" Emily's confidence cracked slightly. "Sir, she came in with a check connected to executive private banking, and I believe there was suspicious activity." Daniel extended his hand toward Gloria gently. "May I?" She handed him the torn paper pieces without speaking. He aligned the edges together in silence. His eyes moved briefly across the signature line. Then he looked directly at Emily for the first time. "You tore up a verified cashier's check issued directly from my office." The branch manager stepped forward immediately. "Mr. Bennett, I can explain." Daniel did not even glance at him. That hurt more somehow. Gloria noticed the tension building across the room and lightly touched her son's wrist. "Daniel," she said softly, "do not embarrass anyone." Several employees lowered their eyes instantly. Daniel looked back at his mother, and for one brief second the powerful executive standing inside the marble lobby disappeared completely. He looked like the same exhausted young man who once fell asleep over college textbooks while she folded laundry beside him in their tiny apartment kitchen. "She embarrassed you," he said quietly. Gloria shook her head once. "No, she embarrassed herself." The words settled heavily into the room. Near the entrance, even the customers who had been whispering earlier had gone completely silent now. Emily's face turned pale as realization fully reached her. The woman she had dismissed, judged, and humiliated was not only connected to the bank. She was the reason the man who owned it existed at all. The lobby remained so quiet that the faint hum of the air conditioning sounded unnaturally loud against the marble walls. Nobody moved. Nobody even reached for a phone anymore. The earlier whispers had disappeared completely, replaced by the uncomfortable stillness that only comes when people realize they witnessed something they should have stopped. Daniel Bennett still held the torn check carefully in both hands, as though preserving it mattered more than the money written across it. His eyes lowered briefly toward the ripped edges before lifting toward the teller counter again. Emily Carter stood frozen behind the polished desk, her fingers tightening around the edge of the terminal screen hard enough for her knuckles to pale beneath her foundation makeup. She looked younger now, smaller somehow. The confidence that had filled her voice earlier had drained out of her completely. "Sir, I did not know she was your mother," she said quietly. Daniel's expression did not change. "That is exactly the problem." The branch manager immediately stepped forward again, sweat visible near his hairline beneath the bright chandelier lighting. "Mr. Bennett, we value every customer equally here at Bennett Federal." Daniel finally looked at him then, calm and unreadable. "Do you?" The manager's mouth opened, but no words came out. Near the entrance, an elderly man sitting beside the waiting area slowly removed his glasses and lowered his newspaper into his lap. Even the security guard near the doors had stopped pretending not to listen. Gloria noticed all of it. The tension, the shame, the fear moving quietly across the room like cold air. She exhaled softly and adjusted the sleeve of her faded scrub top. "Daniel," she said gently, "I came here to deposit a check, not ruin somebody's life." Her son looked at her for several seconds before answering. "Mom, she humiliated you in front of an entire lobby." Gloria glanced briefly toward Emily, then toward the younger teller standing silently nearby. "No," she said quietly. "Humiliation only works if you accept it." The words settled heavily over the polished room. Emily lowered her eyes immediately. Daniel remembered that tone. That same calm strength had carried him through most of his childhood. Gloria Bennett had never raised her voice much. She had not needed to. She was the kind of woman who survived things quietly. Eviction notices folded carefully into kitchen drawers. Bus rides through snowstorms at 5 in the morning because missing work was never an option. Ramen noodles stretched across 3 dinners while she saved enough for his college entrance fees. Daniel suddenly remembered something he had not thought about in years. He was 14, standing inside a grocery store beside his mother while a cashier watched her count dollar bills too slowly. The woman behind them in line had sighed loudly and muttered, "Some people should not have children if they cannot afford them." Daniel remembered the shame burning in his chest that day. He also remembered Gloria smiling softly afterward in the parking lot while cold rain soaked through her jacket. "Never let somebody else decide your worth," she had told him while unlocking their old car. Standing inside the bank now, Daniel realized she had spent her entire life living by those words. The regional director cleared his throat nervously beside him. "Sir, perhaps we should continue upstairs for the board meeting." Daniel did not answer immediately. His attention stayed fixed on the torn check pieces resting in his hands. Finally, he turned toward Gloria again. "You worked another overnight shift, did you not?" Gloria smiled faintly. Mrs. Patterson would not sleep unless somebody sat beside her bed. Daniel shook his head slightly under his breath. Even now, even after everything he had built for her, she still worked because helping people was stitched too deeply into her heart to stop. Emily watched the exchange with growing discomfort. The image she had created in her mind earlier no longer matched reality at all. This was not some confused woman trying to cash stolen money. This was a mother whose exhaustion came from caring for other human beings all night, while people like her judged from polished counters and comfortable chairs. Daniel stepped closer to the teller desk and placed the torn pieces of the cashier's check carefully on the marble surface between them. "Do you know what this money was for?" he asked softly. Emily swallowed hard. "No, sir." Daniel glanced briefly toward his mother before answering. "She was donating it." The silence afterward felt almost physical. "Donating it," Emily repeated softly, as though the word itself no longer made sense inside her head. Daniel nodded once. The overhead lights reflected sharply against the polished marble counter, while every employee nearby stood perfectly still, afraid even their breathing might interrupt the moment. Gloria adjusted the strap of her worn handbag against her shoulder and looked down briefly at the torn check resting on the counter between them. "The children's wing at St. Anne's Hospital lost funding last month," she explained quietly. "Some of the families cannot afford long-term care anymore." Emily stared at her in disbelief. Nearly $500,000. Not for herself. Not for luxury. Not for some hidden account. For sick children she had probably never even met. Daniel watched the realization spread slowly across the lobby like sunlight breaking through heavy clouds. Earlier, people had looked at Gloria with suspicion. Now they looked at her differently. Some with guilt. Some with admiration. One elderly woman seated near the entrance quietly pressed her hand against her chest. Gloria noticed the attention immediately and seemed uncomfortable with it. "Please," she said softly. "I do not need everybody staring." But nobody could stop, because moments like this forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves. Emily lowered her eyes toward the marble floor. The confidence she carried earlier was completely gone now, replaced by something rawer. "I thought," she began weakly, but her voice faded before the sentence could finish. Gloria looked at her gently. "You thought my clothes explained my value." The younger woman swallowed hard. Daniel turned toward the branch manager again. "How long has she worked here?" "Almost 4 years," the manager answered quickly. Top performance numbers every quarter. Daniel gave a faint nod. And in 4 years nobody taught her that dignity matters more than appearance. The manager had no answer for that either. Silence settled again. Somewhere near the ceiling, soft instrumental music continued playing through hidden speakers, strangely peaceful against the tension hanging through the room. Gloria slowly reached into her handbag and removed a folded photograph worn soft at the edges from years of handling. She placed it gently on the counter. Emily looked down carefully. The picture showed a much younger Gloria sitting beside a teenage Daniel at a tiny apartment kitchen table. Books were stacked everywhere. A birthday cake sat between them with crooked frosting and only 2 candles because that was all they could afford that year. Daniel smiled faintly when he saw the photo. You still carry that? Gloria smiled softly. You looked so serious studying for finals. The memory warmed his expression briefly before fading again. Emily stared at the image longer than necessary. It was impossible not to. The photograph carried something no amount of money could purchase. Sacrifice. Years of it. She suddenly imagined Gloria leaving for overnight shifts while other families slept, riding buses through freezing winters, missing meals, missing rest, building somebody else's future one exhausting day at a time while people looked through her instead of at her. Emily's throat tightened unexpectedly. I am sorry, she whispered. Gloria's eyes lifted toward her again. Calm, tired, kind in a way Emily did not feel she deserved. I believe you are, Gloria answered quietly. The branch manager immediately stepped forward. Mr. Bennett, I assure you this situation will be handled internally. Daniel's face hardened slightly. Handled internally, he repeated. My mother was publicly humiliated in your lobby while employees watched. The manager's lips parted nervously. Sir, we can offer compensation immediately. Gloria sighed softly under her breath. Daniel noticed. What is it? He asked. She looked around the massive lobby slowly. At the marble floors polished to mirror brightness. At the expensive suits. At the nervous employees standing behind glossy counters. Then she said the one thing nobody expected. Baby, I do not want compensation. Daniel studied her carefully. Then what do you want? Gloria's voice remained soft, but every person in the lobby heard it clearly. I want the next woman who walks in wearing scrubs, old shoes, or tired eyes to be treated like she matters before anybody discovers who her son is. Nobody moved after that. Nobody even looked away. Because deep down, every person standing there understood she was no longer talking only about herself. The words lingered over the lobby long after Gloria finished speaking. Even the soft music overhead seemed quieter somehow, like the entire building itself had paused to listen. Daniel stood motionless beside his mother, his jaw tight, his fingers resting lightly against the torn checks still lying across the marble counter. Across from them, Emily Carter looked as though she wanted to disappear entirely. Her shoulders had folded inward, and the sharp confidence that once defined her posture was gone now, replaced by something uncertain and painfully human. Near the waiting area, a customer slowly removed his baseball cap and lowered his eyes toward the floor. Another woman quietly wiped beneath her lashes while pretending to check her phone. Nobody expected this morning to turn into a mirror, but that was exactly what it had become. Gloria noticed the silence settling heavily around everyone and gently placed the old photograph back into her handbag. Daniel, she said softly, you still have your meeting upstairs. He looked at her immediately. The meeting can wait. No, Gloria replied with a faint smile. Your responsibilities cannot. Her voice carried the same calm authority it always had when he was younger. The same voice that once pushed him through exhaustion, rejection letters, and nights where success felt impossibly far away. Daniel exhaled slowly through his nose and glanced around the lobby once more. Every employee straightened slightly when his eyes moved across them. Effective immediately, he said calmly. All customer service staff, management included, will complete mandatory dignity and bias training before the end of the quarter. The branch manager nodded almost too quickly. Absolutely, sir. Daniel's eyes stayed on him. And every customer entering this building will be treated with respect before assumptions are made about their income, appearance, or background. Yes, sir. The manager's voice sounded smaller now. Emily swallowed hard. Mr. Bennett. Daniel looked toward her again. She hesitated before speaking, clearly struggling to steady her voice. I know saying sorry is not enough. Gloria gently touched her son's arm before he could answer. Then she looked directly at Emily. "No," she said quietly, "but it is where people begin." Emily blinked rapidly and lowered her eyes again. Gloria could see genuine shame there now, not fear of losing a job or facing consequences. Something deeper. The painful realization that she had become the kind of person she once promised herself she would never be. Gloria recognized that expression because life had humbled her many times before. The difference was whether somebody learned from it. Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and removed a slim black checkbook. Without speaking, he signed a replacement cashier's check against the polished counter. The silver pen moved smoothly beneath the chandelier light. Then he slid it gently toward his mother. "The hospital will receive the full amount before close of business today," he said. Gloria smiled faintly. "Thank you, baby." "No," Daniel answered softly, looking at her with quiet admiration. "Thank you." The regional director nearby shifted awkwardly, still visibly shaken by everything he had witnessed. Daniel turned toward him briefly. "Reschedule the board meeting for this afternoon." "Of course, sir." But before anyone could move, a small voice suddenly spoke near the entrance. "Excuse me." Everyone turned. The little boy from earlier stood beside his father, staring nervously toward Gloria. He could not have been older than 8. His backpack hung loosely from one shoulder, and his sneakers lit up faintly when he shifted his feet. "My dad says you are a good person," the boy said quietly. Gloria's expression softened instantly. "Your father sounds smart." The boy hesitated, then walked several steps closer. "I am sorry they were mean to you." The innocence in his voice hit harder than anything else that morning. Gloria crouched carefully so she could look him in the eye despite the ache in her knees from the overnight shift. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. "Just promise me something." The boy nodded seriously. "When somebody looks tired, sad, or different from you, be kind first. You never know what they had to survive before walking through that door." The child nodded again. His father looked away briefly, embarrassed by the emotion building in his own eyes. Daniel watched his mother quietly from beside the counter. Even now, after humiliation, exhaustion, and judgment, she was still giving something back to the room. Grace, the one thing money could never manufacture. For a long moment, nobody inside the lobby seemed to remember what they were supposed to do next. The printers behind the teller counters sat silent. Computer screens glowed softly beneath the white lighting. Outside the tall glass windows, Manhattan traffic rolled past in restless waves of yellow taxis and flashing brake lights. But inside Bennett Federal, time itself felt slower somehow. Gloria Bennett rose carefully from her crouched position beside the little boy, one hand pressing briefly against her lower back from the stiffness of the overnight shift. Daniel noticed immediately. He always noticed. "Mom," he said gently, "you should sit down." "I have been sitting beside patients for 12 hours, Gloria replied with a tired smile. "Standing feels better right now." A few people laughed softly under their breath, not because the moment was funny, but because her warmth somehow loosened the tension still gripping the room. Daniel shook his head faintly, the corner of his mouth finally lifting for the first time all morning. The expression changed him instantly. Less billionaire, more son. Gloria glanced toward the giant clock mounted above the lobby entrance. "Lord," she murmured quietly, "Mrs. Patterson is probably asking where I went by now." Daniel frowned. "You are going back to work?" "Of course I am." "Mom." "Daniel." The familiar exchange carried years inside it. He had spent half his adult life trying to make her slow down. She had spent half her life refusing to stop helping people just because life finally became comfortable. Daniel looked down briefly, adjusting the cuff of his navy jacket while thinking, "At least let me drive you." Gloria immediately shook her head. "You have a board meeting, and you have not slept. Neither have doctors, nurses, firefighters, or half the mothers in this country." Daniel exhaled quietly through his nose, defeated in the same way he always was with her. Nearby employees exchanged uncertain glances, watching the interaction unfold with growing disbelief. They had seen Daniel Bennett on magazine covers, financial interviews, and business channels for years. Calm, brilliant, untouchable. Yet standing beside this tired woman in faded scrubs, he looked exactly like what he truly was beneath all the success. A son who still listened when his mother spoke. Emily remained behind the teller counter, silent and pale. She had not moved much since Gloria's last words to the little boy. Every sentence she overheard now seemed to deepen the shame already sitting heavily inside her chest. She thought back to her own mother working double shifts at a grocery store outside Cleveland when she was younger. Thought about the nights she promised herself she would never judge people struggling to get by. Somewhere along the way, ambition and polished office culture had hardened parts of her she had not noticed disappearing. Gloria suddenly turned toward her. Not sharply, not angrily, just gently enough to make Emily look up again. "What is your first name?" Emily blinked in surprise. "Emily. Well, Emily," Gloria said softly while adjusting the strap of her old handbag again. "Today does not have to be the worst day of your life." Emily's eyes filled instantly. "I do not know how to fix what I did." Gloria nodded slowly. "Most important things take time." The branch manager stared downward awkwardly, pretending to organize papers that no longer needed organizing. Daniel watched his mother carefully, almost in awe despite having known her his entire life. She had walked into this building exhausted, humiliated, and publicly dismissed, yet somehow she remained the calmest person in the room. The strongest too. One of the board members standing near the executive elevator finally spoke for the first time all morning. "Mrs. Bennett," he said quietly, "the hospital children's wing. Those families are very fortunate." Gloria smiled faintly. "No," she answered. "I was fortunate." The man looked confused. Gloria glanced around the massive bank lobby one last time before continuing. "I had people who helped me when I had nothing. Teachers who stayed late tutoring Daniel for free. Neighbors who watched him while I worked nights. A church lady who slipped grocery cards into my purse without embarrassing me." Her eyes softened with memory. "Nobody gets through hard times alone." Silence returned again, but this time it felt different. Softer. Reflective. Near the entrance, sunlight shifted through the tall windows and stretched golden light across the marble floor where torn pieces of the original check still rested beside the counter. Daniel noticed them immediately. Without saying a word, he bent down and carefully picked up every last piece himself. Daniel held the torn scraps of paper carefully in one hand as he straightened back to his full height. The tiny pieces looked almost weightless against the dark sleeve of his tailored suit, but everyone in the lobby understood they represented something much heavier now. Not money, not banking policy, something deeper. The cost of judging a human being before truly seeing them. Sunlight poured through the massive glass windows overlooking Lexington Avenue, stretching long golden reflections across the marble floor where Gloria had knelt only minutes earlier. The lobby no longer felt cold the way it had before. It felt exposed. Honest in a way expensive places rarely allowed themselves to be. Gloria noticed Daniel staring quietly at the torn check fragments and gently touched his arm again. "Baby," she said softly, "do not carry this around in your heart too long." Daniel looked at her carefully. "You always say that." "Because bitterness is heavy." Her voice stayed calm and warm despite the exhaustion pulling gently beneath her eyes. "And I raised you to build things, not carry." Anger. The words settled deeply into him. Daniel glanced toward Emily once more. She still stood behind the counter, but the sharp posture she had walked in with that morning was gone completely. Her shoulders sagged slightly now beneath the weight of everything she had realized. She looked less like an employee and more like somebody confronting herself for the first time in years. Slowly, Emily reached up and unclipped her employee badge from the collar of her blazer. The small plastic card trembled faintly in her fingers. "Mr. Bennett," she said quietly, "I understand if you want me gone." The branch manager looked nervous immediately, glancing between them as if trying to predict what would happen next. But Daniel did not answer right away. Instead, he looked toward his mother. Gloria understood the question in his eyes before he spoke it aloud. She always did. "Everybody deserves one moment to become better than they were 5 minutes ago," she said softly. Emily's breathing caught slightly. Daniel lowered his eyes for a brief second, then nodded once. "You will remain employed," he said calmly. The branch manager blinked in surprise. Emily looked stunned, but Daniel continued before relief could settle into the room. "However, beginning Monday, you will personally oversee our new Community Dignity Initiative across every branch in Manhattan." Emily stared at him silently. "You will spend time in shelters, community clinics, senior centers, and public schools. You will meet people whose struggles do not disappear just because they walk into a bank lobby wearing clean clothes. Emily's eyes filled slowly with tears. She no longer tried hiding. Daniel's voice remained steady. And when you finish, you will train every future employee who stands behind one of these counters. Nobody in the lobby spoke, because punishment would have been easier, simpler. This required transformation instead. Gloria smiled faintly beside her son, pride softening her tired face. Emily lowered her head completely now, one hand covering her mouth briefly as emotion overwhelmed her. "Thank you," she whispered. Gloria shook her head gently. "Do not thank us yet." Emily looked up. Again, Gloria's eyes stayed kind but firm. "Just make sure another woman does not leave this building feeling invisible." Near the entrance, the little boy from earlier smiled quietly at his father. Even the security guard standing by the doors looked affected now, his expression softer than before. Daniel slipped the torn pieces of the original check into the inside pocket of his jacket instead of throwing them away. Gloria noticed immediately. "Why keep those old scraps?" she asked softly. Daniel looked down briefly toward the pocket over his heart. "Because I do not ever want to forget this day." The words lingered in the sunlight between them. Outside, snow had begun falling lightly across the city, soft white flakes drifting past the towering windows and settling against the busy streets below. Gloria glanced toward the snowfall with tired eyes. "Looks like winter finally decided to show up." Daniel smiled faintly. "Come upstairs before you leave. At least let me get you coffee." Gloria pretended to think about it for a moment. "Only if it is not one of those tiny expensive cups that taste like hot dirt." For the first time all morning, genuine laughter moved through the lobby. Quiet, human, relieved, and standing there beneath the soft gold light of the falling afternoon, Emily Carter realized something she would remember for the rest of her life. The most powerful person in the building had never been the man who owned the bank. It was the tired woman in faded blue scrubs who chose kindness after every reason not to. The elevator ride to the executive floor was quieter than the lobby downstairs, but somehow more emotional. Soft instrumental music drifted through hidden speakers, while the walls of brushed steel reflected faint golden light across the small space. Gloria Bennett stood beside her son holding a paper coffee cup in both hands, the warmth soaking gently into her tired fingers. Daniel watched her carefully from the corner of his eye. Even now, after becoming one of the most powerful men in the financial world, he still noticed the little things about her. The slight stiffness in her knees after overnight shifts. The way exhaustion settled behind her eyes long before she admitted she was tired. The tiny scar near her wrist from years ago when she burned herself cooking dinner after working 18 straight hours. Something success could never erase. When the elevator doors opened, the executive hallway stretched before them in polished silence. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Manhattan as snow drifted softly between skyscrapers outside. Employees passing through the corridor immediately straightened when they saw Daniel, but their attention shifted almost instantly toward Gloria. Not because of fear. Respect. Real respect this time. A young assistant near the conference room smiled warmly at Gloria and held the glass door open for her without hesitation. Gloria smiled back instinctively. "Thank you, sweetheart." Daniel noticed the difference immediately. So did she. Inside the executive lounge, sunlight spilled across dark hardwood floors and expensive leather furniture arranged beside towering windows. Gloria paused near the entrance, looking around slowly. "This room alone probably costs more than my first apartment," she murmured softly. Daniel laughed under his breath. "You still say things like that." "Because I still remember things like that." He handed her a fresh cup of coffee from the counter near the windows. Gloria took a careful sip and immediately made a face. See, hot dirt." Daniel shook his head while smiling again, something lighter finally entering the room after the emotional weight downstairs. For a few minutes neither of them spoke much. Snow continued falling gently beyond the glass, while traffic crawled beneath the gray winter sky far below. Gloria sat carefully near the window, her old canvas handbag resting beside an Italian leather chair worth more than her car. The contrast would have looked strange to some people. To Daniel, it looked perfect, because she belonged anywhere he did. More than he did, honestly. He sat across from her and loosened his tie slightly. "You know," he said quietly, "you could stop working tomorrow if you wanted." Gloria smiled faintly into her coffee cup. "And do what?" "Rest." I rest enough. Daniel raised an eyebrow. Mom, you work overnight shifts at 58 years old. And you work 80-hour weeks pretending stress is a personality trait. He laughed softly again despite himself. Gloria's eyes warmed. Baby, helping people keeps me alive. Daniel leaned back slowly, watching snow collect against the corners of nearby rooftops. I just hate knowing people still look at you and see less than what you are. Gloria was quiet for several seconds before answering. Daniel, some people only know how to measure worth using money, titles, skin color, or clothes. She glanced down briefly at her faded scrubs beneath the expensive executive lighting. That is their poverty, not mine. The words settled deeply into the room. Daniel lowered his eyes thoughtfully. Growing up, he used to think success would protect his mother from moments like the one downstairs. He thought wealth could erase judgment somehow. But standing in that lobby earlier forced him to confront something painful. No amount of money changed how quickly some people dismissed tired black women wearing old shoes. Gloria seemed to sense the weight moving through his thoughts. Do not let today harden you, she said gently. Promise me that. Daniel looked at her carefully. I wanted to walk back downstairs and fire half the building. I know. Part of me still does. Gloria nodded softly. But if people only learn fear, they do not truly change. Outside the window, snowflakes drifted slowly against the fading afternoon light. Daniel reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket and removed the torn check fragments again. He stared at them silently for a moment before placing them carefully on the table between them. Gloria looked down at the ripped paper beneath the warm sunlight pouring through the glass. Then, very softly, she smiled. Funny thing is, she whispered, those torn pieces did more good than the full check ever could. The snow continued falling long after the city lights began flickering on beneath the darkening sky. From the executive lounge windows, Manhattan looked softer now, wrapped in white and gold reflections that blurred the sharp edges of the buildings below. Gloria Bennett sat quietly beside the glass with both hands wrapped around the last warmth of her coffee cup, while Daniel stood nearby, staring out over the streets he had spent years conquering. Somewhere deep in the building beneath them, elevators moved, phones rang, and business continued exactly as it always had. But something inside Bennett Federal had shifted that day. Something impossible to measure on financial reports or quarterly statements. Daniel finally loosened his tie completely and sat beside his mother near the window. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was comfortable, the kind built over decades of surviving life together. Gloria looked tired now in a way she could no longer fully hide. The overnight shift, the emotional weight of the morning, the years behind her eyes all rested gently against her face beneath the warm executive lighting. Daniel noticed every bit of it. You should let me hire someone to drive you home, he said softly. Gloria smiled faintly without looking away from the snow outside. I raised a billionaire, and somehow he still worries like a little boy. Because you are still my mother. Her expression softened at that. Daniel reached into his jacket pocket once more and removed the torn check fragments carefully folded together. The ripped paper looked fragile beneath his fingers. Gloria glanced down at it and shook her head lightly. You really are keeping those? Forever, Daniel answered quietly. He reached across the table for a pen resting near a stack of financial reports and slowly wrote something on the back of one torn piece before sliding it toward her. Gloria adjusted her reading glasses and looked down. In neat handwriting, Daniel had written only 4 words. Treat people before judging. Gloria stared at the paper silently for several seconds. Then she smiled in that quiet way only mothers could, full of pride and sadness and love all at once. That sounds like something your grandmother used to say. Daniel nodded faintly. I think about her a lot lately. Outside, snowflakes drifted slowly past the towering windows like soft ash in the evening light. Gloria leaned back carefully against the leather chair and closed her eyes for just a moment. Your grandmother would have marched downstairs and embarrassed every employee in that lobby. Daniel laughed quietly under his breath. She absolutely would have. Gloria opened her eyes again, smiling softly now. But she also would have brought cookies back the next morning. The two of them laughed together gently while the city glowed beneath them. Downstairs, employees were still talking quietly about what had happened. Some replayed the moment Daniel stepped off the elevator. Others talked about Gloria kneeling on the marble floor, picking up torn paper with dignity nobody in the room deserved. But the story spreading fastest through the building was not about the bank owner at all. It was about the tired black woman in faded blue scrubs who walked into a place full of judgment and somehow left compassion behind instead of bitterness. Back upstairs, Daniel's phone buzzed against the table with messages from board members asking if the meeting would continue tonight. He looked at the screen for a moment, then silenced it without answering. Gloria noticed immediately. You cannot ignore work forever. Maybe not. He looked toward her again. But some things matter more. Gloria reached over and gently squeezed his hand once, the same way she used to before school exams when he was young and afraid of failing. You already became successful, Daniel, she whispered softly. Now just stay good. The words settled into the room with the quiet weight of truth. Outside the window, snow continued covering the city one rooftop at a time, softening everything beneath it. Daniel looked down at the torn check pieces resting between them and realized something quietly beautiful. Money had built the bank. Power had built the empire. But the strongest thing inside that building had been a woman who spent her life caring for people nobody else noticed. And as the evening lights reflected across the glass and mother and son sat together above the sleeping winter city, the silence no longer felt heavy at all. It felt like peace.